This is Shadowq, and I'm here today to talk about matchmaking. So let's start off with why this is important. Well, first of all, the quality of matchmaking really only affects the top 5% of players, but those are the players that are going to have the most attention out of people in Smite. They're the people that are streaming, they're the people that are pro players whose perceptions will be over Twitter and stuff. So it affects streams, which does affect viewers. And if viewers aren't having as much fun as they could, it does ultimately impact Smite's success. So this is really, really an important issue that is uh, you know, not just helping pro players. If streams are better, then more players are having fun. So it's just good for Smite's growth, and it is actually pretty impactful. So as far as I remember, when ranked was implemented, ranked queues counted down, and they were 1 hour long. So this does seem a bit excessive, but for the time, there wasn't really enough player base to constitute having anything shorter. Sometimes it really did take 1 hour to get a quality match in, and it was a good system for what it was. Nothing really should have been changed about it back then. There wasn't enough, there weren't enough players for it to be anything differently. So basically, let's talk about what a queue counting down means. This means that like the queue starts at 1 hour and makes its way down, counts down to zero, and when it gets to zero, it pairs people. So what it does when it pairs people, previously everybody, well, this is still true, but everybody had a matchmaking rating, which otherwise stands for MMR. Uh, and as soon as the queue popped, it would take the top 10 people, MMR wise, and put them in a match. Once it had those 10 people in the match, it would calculate to see how they could swap the teams around so the teams were as close to each other in average MMR. So that was really good. That's exactly what the system should do. It guaranteed that the best people will be in the best game, and that's it. And that was super, super important. And you don't want, bronze people playing with masters people. So the problem with this is not, well, there wasn't really a problem back then, but it wasn't ideal because the average queue time would be 30 minutes, and that's just not good. You don't really want queues to be that long. Back then, it was a solution to the problem of a small player base. So what Hi-Rez did is, as the game grew, they lowered the queue time just bit by bit until it eventually got down to 8 minutes, where it stayed at for a while, I think. That was a pretty happy point for it to be at. But the problem with this is queues counting down aren't really ideal. So it sometimes just automatically pairs you when an acceptable match was not there. So that would mean when there really aren't that many people queuing, that bronze players would actually be paired with diamond players, which is not good. Um, it's less and less frequent the more people you have, but sometimes it was the case, and that just wasn't good enough. So people complained, and Hi-Rez eventually got around to changing it to a queue system that actually counts up. So the difference is there's no forced queue pop when it gets to zero. It doesn't get to zero. It starts at zero and it counts up. It just tells you how long you've been in queue. So what this means is that as soon as you enter the queue, there's an acceptable range of MMR that it can pair you with. So if your MMR is, let's say, 1500 and you queue, if there are 9 other people within plus or minus 200 MMR of you, it should put all of you in a match right away. That's really good. It means that you're not waiting excess time. It pairs you whenever there's an acceptable match available, and it's just what the system really should be. Um, However, this matchmaking is way harder to program because most of the time there's not going to be 9 other people that are that close to you. So what's going to have to happen is over time, the acceptable range of MMR has to increase. For example, it would go up by like 100 acceptable range per minute. So at 0 to 1 minutes, it would be like anyone within plus or minus 200 MMR of you could get paired, and then after a minute, it would be 300, and so on and so forth until it more or less automatically forces you to have a match, which is really good. Nobody wants to sit in queue forever. This guarantees that you'll eventually get a match, and if you sit in queue long enough, you accept the fact that you can get paired with worse people. And it's a good trade-off. It guarantees that you get a match. It pairs you with people when there's a match. It's just a better overall system. So what I've described so far is only good. It's exactly what it should be, but there are some things wrong with the system. Um, the three biggest things are sometimes it just doesn't work. A really important thing is that it doesn't always pair the top 10 players, which often splits good queues up. And lastly, when somebody dodges or doesn't accept the queue, It does not requeue you. So let's start with sometimes it doesn't work. I don't really know why this happens, but sometimes after you've been in queue for only a minute or two, you sometimes get paired with people way, way lower or higher than you should be. And this is the one point out of the three that I really don't have an explanation for. I don't know why it does this. Sometimes it seems like I'm in queue for maybe like 2, 3 minutes, and I get paired with people that are 2000 MMR lower than me. That's not even an exaggeration. That has happened. I don't know how that can be fixed, but that's got to be something on high reses, and I really don't have an explanation. The other points, though, I'm pretty sure I know how they work, and I think I hopefully can explain them in detail. So the next point is that it does not always pair the best players in a game together. So you'd rather have the top 10 people just like before be in one game than, have it be like, half bronze and half diamond in one game. It's just, well, you don't want that. So you more or less in every game want the top 10 people to get queued. So currently, Hi-Rez's algorithm prioritizes making a closer MMR match over pairing the top 10 people, or the closest 10 people. This gets a bit complicated here, so I'll do my best to try to explain. But let's say there are 10 people with 2000 MMR, just queuing and they're in queue. And there are also 10 pros with roughly 2500 MMR. This doesn't mean that they're all at exactly that rating. Some people will be like 1950, some people will be like 2100, some people will be like 1900, and for the pros it will be, roughly the same variance around those points. So what the system should do is if they're all in queue, they should pair the 10 pro players with 2500 MMR and the 10 2000 MMR players. Instead, what the system does is it checks to see if they pair people, which matches will have the closest MMR, the closest average MMR. So sometimes the way this works out, there will be, for example, five pros in one game and five pros in another, just because the average rating of each team is as close to each other as possible. Now, this means that, let's say the average MMR of one team will be 2200 compared to like 2250 if they paired, it the way I just said. But if they paired the pros together, so the difference between there is 50 MMR. That's not bad. That's a really, really close match, which was what the high res system tries to do now. Um, if they pair the pros and the non-pros together in the 10 and 10, then the average MMR difference would be something like 70 or 80. And those numbers are a bit exaggerated, but the point is, when the difference is so small like that, the system currently prioritizes pairing people regardless of minuscule differences like that, and doesn't really value whatsoever having they don't value having closeness and skill of individual players, but rather average MMR, because that's just how the system sees it. And this is obviously not ideal. You don't want people that are further away from each other in skill playing in the same game. It's worse for, well, both sides. It's just less fun. You want to play with people around your skill level. That's the whole point of ranked. Um, so that could be fixed by, well, just the programming for this is probably more difficult than I think it is, but there are solutions to it. All I'm going to say for now is that that is the problem and it really should be looked into. If pros aren't playing in games with other pros, it's really bad. Finally, the dodge slash requeue system. Right now, if someone dodges a queue, the current system acts like you were never in queue in the first place. It just completely ignores it. So in reality, all the remaining players will be in the queue. Like if somebody dodges a queue, all nine people are going to requeue 9 times out of 10, at least. I don't know. So they'll all be in the queue, and those players were in an acceptable match together, which means that they should pretty easily be able to find a 10th person. Maybe that'll take a minute or two, but it doesn't really matter. Like if it takes an extra minute, people would rather wait. They already waited their time in queue. They found the match, and now they could just find a replacement person, and that's not the way it does it. Instead, it makes you wait the entire like 10 minutes or 17 minutes that you waited before without even considering that you already waited that amount of time. And this artificially extends the queue times and makes people be able to play the game less often, which is obviously really bad. So, those are pretty much the three things about matchmaking right now that I could think of that really, really should be improved on. And it would be good for players, viewers, and ultimately Smite's growth. Um, Finally, all of this is not really Hi-Rez's fault. Those are things that Hi-Rez can improve on, but ultimately, if the player base was big enough, the queues would be just really, really good. They'd be instant whenever enough people queued up, and all of these are solved by a bigger player base, basically. That's not to say the Smite's player base is small, but these are problems that exist when there aren't enough people at a certain skill level queuing at the same time. So you can't really blame high res for everything, but these are things that absolutely should be looked at and improved upon. So thank you guys for watching. Really appreciate it. Give me a follow on YouTube or subscribe, I think it's called, on YouTube. And thanks. See you guys next time.